Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Thursday, November the 13th. Keir Starmer is under pressure to sack the Chief of Staff who got him into Downing Street. And the PM has had to refer himself to his ethics advisor after it turned out he broke his promise to stay out of a decision about the new football regulator that went to a Labour donor. My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. But I've got something else this morning, something that I've done with my Sky News hat on, so you can see it on the TV and online. And that is that Keir Starmer's communications chief, Tim Allen, still owns a minority stake in a lobbying firm and still discusses government activity and politics with a senior consultant at the company. That's right, he's got shares in a firm called Strand Partners, and he talks to somebody who works for them about what's going on in politics. And this has led to calls for an investigation because there is a perception of a conflict of interest. Labour says that Allen has not done anything to benefit Strand Partners. We'll do more on this in a moment.
But there was one topic in Westminster yesterday, and that was the fallout from the briefing by allies of the Prime Minister against Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary. Near universal agreement that this has weakened the PM and actually strengthened Streeting. The Health Secretary demanded that whoever briefed against him be sacked. He talked about a toxic culture in Number 10. The Prime Minister appears to have launched an investigation to find the briefers, but it is doubtful that there is a serious intent to find the culprit. The front pages, however, are full of demands, including reportedly from cabinet ministers, that he sack his chief of staff, Morgan McSweeney. Long-standing figure in the party told me there is a briefing culture against all and sundry officials, ministers, and just a bad overall feeling emanating from Number 10. I guess this source said it was just Wes's turn, and there is real anger about that.
I was out on the terrace next to the River Thames last night on the side of the Houses of Parliament, and the mood was absolutely grim. The topic of conversation is whether Keir Starmer has shortened his political lifespan as Prime Minister, and it's hard not to find Labour folk talking about, as allies of the Prime Minister had apparently been suggesting, there'll be a challenge after the budget, which for my money is too soon, or whether it'll come after May, which seems to me, as many of the most senior Labour figures I talk to, much more plausible. The rumour mill is going wild, and I'll call it rumour because this stuff is not substantive. Is Morgan McSweeney actually helping Shabana Mahmood? She denies she's plotting for the leadership. How soon could Angela Rayner make a comeback? Some of her allies think it could be as soon as May. And one name I keep hearing, Anne, about a plausible replacement for Keir Starmer? That's a familiar figure, Ed Miliband. Right now, he's probably the highest rated cabinet minister amongst Labour members, if you exclude Angela Rayner. Would you put your money on an Ed Miliband return? Is that going to be the story of 2026?
The revival of the Ed Stone. Well, there is a sense of unsated ambition about Ed Miliband. I certainly would not rule him out, Sam, running if a vacancy arose. Highly rated among Labour members. Green issues, he's stuck to his guns on that. If the direction of travel is to build a big left of centre tent and move away from trying to appeal across the centre ground to the right, so the right of centre in the sort of classic Blair-like way. But you do come back to a couple of fundamental things that apply. And one is that Ed Miliband did lose an election very badly in 2015. Two is that it would clearly be such a change of direction that it's hard to see it not taking Labour on the road to an early general election. Nigel Farage is not wrong about that. He has his own reasons for saying all the time there's going to be an election as soon as 2027 or even earlier. But I think in this scenario, you have to go to the country pretty quickly. And also, is Ed Miliband really the right figure to save the Red Wall as well as those progressive, urban, green-leaning folk? It just actually had a message in, it never stops, does it, from someone who's been deep in the Labour apparat for a very long time saying people are not looking for leadership change. We really do want to get on with the job, but time is pressing to show delivery. And that is the tension, isn't it? That we are legitimately starting to talk about successors to Keir Starmer when we haven't even got on with the delivery. And whatever happened to phase 2 of Starmer, if we remember that?
Oh, phase 2 is going very, very well. Look, one of the reasons I think we're talking about Ed Miliband is that because the soft left doesn't really have a candidate at the moment, should there be a leadership contest. The Labour right, well, it's got Wes Streeting and Shabana Mahmood. Angela Rayner, for now, remains out of the race. So I think that's one of the things that's going on and why his name is popping up. And it is popping up on the lips of MPs. But the fact that it's popping up on the lips of MPs, for all the reasons that you just succinctly outlined, is actually a factor that could keep Keir Starmer in place because he's popular amongst Labour members, is old Ed. And so it's a non-negligible chance that should he want to run, he could win. And that scares a slice of the Parliamentary Labour Party. And so that's actually possibly the best news possible for Keir Starmer. Right, you've been talking to a lot of people. We've both sort of got notebooks full of stuff to digest. Do you want to go first?
Here the jottings, lots of conversations across the party officials and people backing different players in this big dogfight. One theme that just keeps coming back to me is the culture in Number 10. This is from an ally of Wes Streeting, but someone who also understands and knows that world very well. This is what they texted. I just don't know what's happened in the last few days, referring to the arguments about Morgan McSweeney. Is he behind the briefings or did he fail to get a grip on them? I just do not know what is happening in there. Number 10 is paranoid right now. It's febrile. They operate as a bunker. Relations with backbenchers are shocking and cite something I hadn't noticed but quite telling. MPs at the PLP meeting, the last one where the Prime Minister tried to calm things down, were told to give their name and seat. Well, there was some amusement from this person who has been through a lot of these themselves, saying it's quite something that Keir doesn't know his own MPs and they have to introduce themselves. And at the very least, the optics of that are terrible. He said, for heaven's sake, we are supposed to be one team. Also, my playbook colleague at Politico, Dan Bloom, is saying this morning that there are also questions over McSwexit, the McSweeney exit. Would that quell the anger of MPs? McSweeney could hardly stay in government if Starmer is binned, but does it also work the other way round? It's harder to get rid of Keir Starmer if McSweeney stays in the way. He's been the Praetorian Guard.
So listeners to this podcast will know that for a while, for about a month now, we've been saying, and I've been saying, that the direction of government has changed. It's changed away from the one that Morgan McSweeney was steering it into, which was to concentrate on voters that might be drifting off to reform. And really the direction of this government and the sort of messaging of this government has moved a bit to the left. And I've been asking the question, if Morgan McSweeney, as Chief of Staff, isn't in the driving seat of the direction of the comms of this government, then is he going to stay for the long time? And you'll remember the story I did in September that the Prime Minister considered demoting him, making him report into Darren Jones, but then reversed that. So there have been lots of factors to suggest that Morgan McSweeney might not last the long term, even before all the claims and counterclaims about the extent to which he was or wasn't involved in the briefing in the last 48 hours. So if he does go, and some friends of his think that it's now not impossible, then that has a long tail. There are some specific things I want to bounce off you, Anne, two bits of things that seemed slightly like madness to me. Firstly, and I did find, I thought it was quite amazing, really. At one point yesterday, advisors from Number 10 were telling MPs and others that the whole of the briefing, reported by several journalists, didn't come from the Prime Minister's allies or from Number 10, but in fact, it was all a double bluff. And actually, this was all being put around by Wes Streeting and Shabana Mahmood, and they just got a bit carried away with their briefings to journalists. And I mean, nobody who they were trying to try this on fell for this for a second. Is it really the case that all the journalists who got the briefings then lied about the sourcing in their copy? It didn't pass the sniff test. But apparently some advisors in Number 10 were trying that line on people, not that it worked. And secondly, and there is a whole debate about the extent to which there is an investigation into the leak inquiry. Right. Anna Turley, the Labour chair, went on Robert Peston's show last night and said that there was an investigation. And incredibly, there was a conversation involving Number 10 figures after that about whether or not they should walk back her words and make it clear that that wasn't properly true. Now, the optics of somebody saying there's going to be a leak inquiry and then the party formally making clear that maybe it's not a full leak inquiry is just bananas and probably sends the last signal you want to send at this time. But clearly, some in Number 10 seem to have a political screw loose. What do you think, Anne?
I think it's like trying to get to a nuclear de-escalation once you've launched the missile in Doctor Strangelove. It's hello, Dimitri, territory for Cold War film buffs. Because in some ways, the damage has been done, and whatever you do now is just mitigation. But as you point out, I watched that Anna Turley interview thinking, this is not going to say very much. I was like eye-popping thing to watch late at night, thinking, you're really going to start going out, Kremlin style, we're going to find the leaker. I mean, really, do you want to start that on top of what you've already got going on? I see also in Playbook this morning that there are people saying this isn't a formal one. Anyone found to have leaked would be dealt with, or made unauthorized briefings. Seem to me to be the same thing. But anyway, but that is very different language from actively searching for leakers. And it's possible that Anna Turley sort of got a bit carried away with her language there. So she's chair. What does Lucy Powell, as the new deputy leader, make of this? Does she agree with this? It's this thing. There are just too many people with too many titles in Labour running around saying completely contradictory things.
What does Lucy Powell think? And that is a brilliant question. I'm sure we'll find the answer. But this is not the pitch role for the budget that they would have wanted.
Let's draw back the lens a bit now. This is a story about how Number 10 presents itself and also how others perceive Number 10 and therefore the Prime Minister's operation. And Sam, I think you do have something breaking on that.
That's right. I mentioned it at the top of the podcast. This is a story I'm running on Sky News about the Executive Director of Communications in Number 10. He's called Tim Allen. We've talked about him before. Now, it turns out that he owns a minority stake in a lobbying firm. Now, that feels quite unusual. He owns 10% of a firm called Strand Partners. When he entered government at the start of September, he resigned the directorship of that company. And he also agreed, after discussions with the Cabinet Office, to forego any dividends and followed all of their guidance. But he did keep this minority shareholding. So that's unusual enough in all sorts of ways, according to political figures I've spoken to. But what's more, Tim Allen is talking to someone who works for Strand Partners about government business and politics, a senior consultant to that company, a figure that's actually very familiar in Westminster. That is Tom Baldwin, Prime Minister's friend, the Prime Minister's biographer, longtime journalist, but also does part-time work for Strand Partners. Now, Tom isn't a lobbyist. He has a contract with Strand that makes that very clear. However, that relationship between Tim Allen, Tom Baldwin and Strand Partners has led to accusations of a perception of, that one of Downing Street's most senior figures has a conflict of interest, which is a potential breach of the Special Advisor Code. This isn't challenged by Downing Street, who say the pair speak in Mr. Baldwin's capacity as a journalist and that Allen has done nothing to benefit Strand Partners. But both the Liberal Democrats and the Tories have written to the Cabinet Secretary and Cabinet Office demanding a probe. And today, Green leader Zach Polanski weighs in, and you can see what he says on Sky. Now, I've just got to say, to be clear, just to put this beyond doubt, we are not saying that Tom Baldwin, who is not a lobbyist, or Strand Partners have done anything wrong at all. The question that we are asking this morning, the question that opposition politicians are asking this morning, is whether there's the perception of a conflict of interest involving a very senior communications figure in Number 10. That person is Tim Allen.
It's a tangled web, isn't it? And I've been thinking about this, since it was clear you were going to break the story. And it seems to me, Sam, that there is a complexity and sometimes a kind of opacity that people don't appreciate themselves when they come into Number 10 or back into Number 10. In Tim Allen's case, after a very long and very successful career in the private sector. And they're used to having contacts. There's not, in any sense, always for money or for proffer. They are just their contacts, their people they bounce ideas off. They have a network, and that also makes them very valuable. Of course, once you come back into the eye of the storm and to public scrutiny, because Tim Allen is overall head of communications for Number 10 and personally was appointed to polish the reputation of Keir Starmer, then all of your other connections come under close scrutiny. And I just do wonder, I don't want to sort of litigate the difference between what Tim Allen's doing or what Tom Baldwin is doing. I know Tom Baldwin is a bit Marmite. Some people, I think, as our playbook says this morning, his influence is not always appreciated in the building, which is a great piece of understatement by our writer there. He also had criticised the briefing operation. He can be quite outspoken. But really it comes down to that. Is this a relationship that they can have in a different way, now that Tim Allen is in Number 10? And what does Tom Baldwin actually want to do? What's his role? To me, it's this lack of clarity that is causing a lot of the problems around Keir Starmer.
Yeah, look, I've looked at all aspects of money and politics and this kind of thing for 20 plus years. And, what it always comes down to is whether or not there are conflicts of interest if you're in government. And I think the media routinely looks at outside financial interests of people in politics. I think this is a pretty standard story. The problem that Tim Allen faces is that the code of conduct for special advisors, and as executive director of communication in Number 10, he is a special advisor. And it's very clear that the test against which he is being judged is whether or not there is a perception of a conflict of interest. Let me read you the key bit. Special advisors must ensure that no conflict arises or could reasonably be perceived to arise between the official duties and their private interests, financial or otherwise. And look, I had a member of Labour's National Executive Committee, somebody on the NEC, and saying this is a massive conflict of interest. When we promised integrity to the British public, the first thing he has to do is give up his shareholding. And that's before you get to opposition politicians that said all the things I've said they said. So the question being raised by opposition politicians is whether, there could be this perception of a conflict of interest. Let me just run through the terms and conditions bit. A Labour spokesman said the allegation that Tim Allen has done anything to benefit Strand partners whilst in Number 10 is categorically false. Tom Baldwin is an established journalist, author and commentator who regularly appears on Sky News, true. And any interactions with him are in his capacity as journalist and have not related to Strand, its business or its clients. The Cabinet Office said there is a rigorous process to capture any political conflicts of interest, and appropriate mitigations are in place to reflect specific circumstances. Ahead of his appointment, Tim Allen fully complied with this process. By the way, Anne, we don't know what those mitigations are. And a Strand Partners spokesman said Tom Baldwin is a journalist and the biographer of the Prime Minister. He does not engage in government relations for Strand. This is not part of his terms of engagement with us. He sought advice for his interests from the Cabinet Office and followed all of those. He receives no financial benefit from Strand and is not involved in our operations. You have to say all of that. I come back to the question that politicians are saying on Sky, you can watch them do it, is the relationship here, does it possibly give rise to the perception of a conflict of interest? Because the man at the top has shares in a lobbying firm and talks about politics to somebody who does work for that lobbying firm.
Perception is a key word here, isn't it? And it is clearly a subjective word, but it's in there, isn't it? It's in these rules and regulations precisely so that you can have this conversation when it arises. Otherwise, we would, there wouldn't be anything to see here in the sense that Tim Allen isn't taking dividends. Gather, I think that your statement says the same thing. He isn't deriving financial benefit. Obviously, what happens generally down the line, is more impactful when people leave their jobs. And if he's a shareholder in a company, it depends what happens to that company. But I think the real point here, to me, is this unclear relationship, which is maybe where the perception point is going to weigh and will just have to be dealt with in some way, one way or another. It is true that Tom Baldwin is a journalist. I've known Tom Baldwin a lot of years, so have you. But he's also a journalist who has a kind of Boswell to Johnson function when it comes to Keir Starmer. He wrote he's tried to, I think, to see himself as a pro Starmer figure in a media world which he would say is sometimes overly hostile to Labour and to Starmer. So yes, that is true. He is a journalist by trade and a writer by portrayed. But I think to an extent, it feels there is a perception of he is also something of a functionary. So I would just say you could put the spotlight on Tim Allen's role here, but it is that particular and slightly peculiar functionality there of Tom Baldwin in this picture that has driven this story.
Well, let's see how it all shakes down. That's it for this week. My goodness, what a week. And given the speed with which everything is developing, who knows where we'll be on Monday, other than in your feeds from just before 8 a.m. I look forward to seeing you then to find out what has happened. What on earth is about to hit us?
I feel like I need to lie down with a cucumber face mask before we get back into the day.
Good luck with that. See you on Monday.
See you on Monday.
Hey, it's Sophie and Will from Sky News.
Too many headlines, too little time?
We get it, and that's why we're bringing you Cheat Sheet.
10 minutes every weekday morning.
All the big stories from politics to pop culture, minus the noise.
No doom scrolling, no spin, just the stories that matter from two people who live and breathe the news. Cheat Sheet with Ridge and Frost from Sky News.
Follow Cheat Sheet wherever you get your podcasts.